On today's episode, we'll be discussing the importance of creating a plan for generational wealth. And I believe that that plan starts with number one, being intentional about creating a plan for generational wealth. And that's so very important because we have to begin to look at how we can leave behind an inheritance and resources to those that ultimately come behind us. We're all here to be a blessing to others. So we are blessed to be a blessing, and it's our responsibility to help serve others, is to be able to help pass on something to those that I come in contact with. And creating a plan for generational wealth is doing just that. So it's about looking at those that will come behind me. And it's important that we start that plan as quickly as we possibly can, or as soon as possible. So it's never too early to get started, and it's never too late to get started. But it's about being intentional. And a scripture tells us in Proverbs 13 and 22 that a good man leaves behind an inheritance for his or her children's children. And so we have to begin to look at how we can do just that. So on a daily, weekly, monthly basis, we have to begin to position ourselves based upon the decisions that we make to say, okay, well, hey, how I'm investing my money, is this an asset or is this a liability? Am I positioning myself so that I'm investing into assets? So assets are things that ultimately they add value to us. They generate a return. Liabilities are those things that ultimately I'm spending money on that ultimately they generate no return, or they have no added value. And so that's very important, is beginning to look at how I spend my money on a daily, weekly, monthly basis so that I can create a plan that goes towards generational wealth. And so with that, I believe that we have to set aside resources to do just that. So I'm going to start with a savings plan. And so this particular plan is a 10, 10, 20, 57, 3 plan. What does that ultimately mean? Basically, it's saying the first 10% of all income that I ultimately receive, it should go to God. I should tithe that first 10%. That's investing into generational wealth. It's giving the first 10% back to God. Another 10% can be allocated towards my wants, my needs. So whether that be, a pair of shoes, it may be certain, hobbies, interests that I ultimately have. I can spend 10% on the things that I ultimately want. I should spend 20% of the income that I receive towards savings and investment tools. So 20% of my income should ultimately go towards savings and also into investment tools. And we'll talk more about different types of investment tools and options. The other 57% should be the essentials that you need to live on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. So 57% of your income you should be able to ultimately live off of for your essentials. And then the last 3% should ultimately be invested back into your own continuous learning, training, and development. So in order for me to create generational wealth, I've got to invest back into myself as well to become more knowledgeable about certain things. Whether it's more knowledgeable about certain investment options, whether it's more knowledgeable about my profession so that I can ultimately as well continue to move up the ladder or the chain of success so that I can create more income to be able to set aside for savings and investments for generational wealth. So it's the 10, 10, 20, 57, and 3 rule. And so with that 20% that's being allocated towards savings and investments, it's important to understand how compound interest ultimately works. And so let's say that if you're just putting all your money into a traditional savings plan or savings account that ultimately may yield you 0.002% of money earned on what you invest or what you put aside in that savings account, in comparison to a tool that can ultimately generate you a 9 to 14% rate of return on your savings, it's going to make a huge difference. And so I'm going to give you an example of the power of compounding interest. So let's say that if we took an initial investment of $2,000, and with that initial investment of $2,000, let's say we set aside $250 a month for 30 years, and we were utilizing an investment tool or option that created a 10% rate of return on an annual basis. That initial investment of $2,000 plus $250 in monthly contributions would yield me over $515,000 in 30 years. And that same amount invested over 40 years would ultimately make you into a millionaire, over $1.4 million. And so that's the power of compound interest. And so that's why, in order to have the right plan, you have to have tools that you're utilizing that's going to give you compounding interest. That means that's your money working for you while you are asleep, while you are doing whatever it is that's important to you. Money that ultimately works for you, compounding interest. And so there's a few tools that we'll ultimately discuss that we want to begin to think about, that we want to begin to research as it relates to what are some investment tools. How do I create generational wealth that I can invest my money into? One of those tools is real estate. So real estate, there's different types of real estate investment options. You have fix and flip financing, or fix and flip real estate options, which is basically where you acquire a property at a discounted rate that ultimately needs to be rehabbed, and you put some money into this particular property, and then you resell it, and then you're ultimately able to make, I guess, a return on that investment. You also have your single family homes, you have multi-family homes, so you have your duplexes, your triplexes, your quads, and there's different types of real estate options that are ultimately out there. And we'll get into more of the specifics of each particular investment tool, but these are things that we want to begin to research and to study and to learn more about. So real estate is one. Another tool is life insurance. And so it's very important, I believe, that we should all have life insurance policies in place. And so there's term policies, and then there's whole life policies. And so there's pros and cons to both. And so a term policy is going to be for a set duration of time, which will give you a payout. So let's say that in term policy, if I'm purchasing a policy for $500,000 or $1 million, it's going to be for a set period of time, maybe for 20 years or 30 years. And so at the end, if that particular person who's insured ultimately passes away, or myself, I pass away, then at the end of the day, when I pass away, in that duration of time, I'm leaving something behind to those that I ultimately will in my will. So life insurance is an option. You also have whole life policies with the ability to generate cash value, so you can have access to cash based upon certain type of life insurance policies. Another one is ultimately stocks. So buying stocks and generating a rate of return on stocks. You have bonds, and bonds are basically these are like IOUs. So what happens with investors is that they can ultimately purchase these bonds from governmental or corporate entities for a certain rate of return on their money. You also have CDs. a certificate of deposit. And so basically that happens with banks. You basically will invest your money for a certain amount of time, and based upon that duration of time, you're able to generate, a certain amount or rate of return on that money. So you also have real estate trusts. And so basically what this is, these are real estate companies, and this is stock that ultimately you are purchasing or you're investing in, that's specifically geared towards real estate. You also have crowdfunded real estate. This is when a group of people come together and they invest in a collaborative manner into certain real estate projects. That's crowdfunded real estate. And then you also have a business. You can build a business that can be carried on from generation to generation. And from there, you can create and establish a legacy that can be passed on. So there's many different types of investment tools and options that are out there that exist, even beyond the few that we just listed. But the most important things that we want to begin to do is understanding the importance of creating generational wealth and being intentional about setting in place a plan to do just that. Because let's think about it for a second. Wouldn't it be wonderful for us to see those behind us not have to necessarily deal with certain struggles or have certain struggles that we had to ultimately go through? Wouldn't it be nice to have the ability for them to be better off than we are? And so from there, they can have resources to further invest into themselves and into their dreams. And so we'd be amazed of how many dreams come true based upon the inheritance, based upon the wealth that was set in place before one. So many businesses are founded based upon generational wealth, having resources to be able to invest and to grow and to scale and have the capital to be able to make certain, mistakes. So it's very important that we all begin to put in place a plan for creating generational wealth. And then the next thing is ultimately is to protect it by making sure we have certain wills and trust and certain things in place. And so that'll be something that we talk about in our future episodes.